When you say taken over, what do you mean?
Well, they own it now. It used to be owned by some hippie guy. Now they own it. They bought it, fair and square. The story goes...
Less than $20,000.
We have not been able to confirm this story, but the story goes that the old owner of Communion was approached by Tribal Thumb and what he called a bunch of foxy young girls, and that they explained their whole Wilhelm Reich sex philosophy to him and said, hey, if you sell us this restaurant, you'll have all the term he uses is Reichian bliss you can handle.
Oh, boy.
Oh, no.
Right. And then he doesn't get it. And supposedly he tries to take legal action. We haven't been able to.
He tried to sue because he didn't get to like have an orgy.
Yeah. That's the story.
They could just be like, we were talking about curry.
Right.
Reichian bliss. You can spend some time in the accumulator.
And the taking over of this restaurant, like this is their vehicle into the People's Food System. Like this is kind of how they get involved. And it run like it's part of the People's Food System. It's listed in the directory as one of the collectives operating. Really important to note that it is now the current location of the moved Stud
Yes.
bar.
Interesting.
Yes,
Yeah.
the Stud, which is connecting back to our first episode. We were talking about San Quentin, and I told listeners to check out the footage of the punk band Crime playing at San Quentin in, I think, 76. I guess the same year, or 77, around when this happened.
Yeah.
The Crime actually played one of their first shows and one of the first punk shows that I can find in San Francisco at the old location of the Stud in South of Market.
Wow.
Wait, but so why does Tribal Thumb want to get into the People's Food System?
It seems like the most kind of reasonable explanation that seems to appear is that it is a really fertile ground for organizing, and it's a place where a lot of people are doing a lot of shit on the left. And it's also like maybe mistakenly understood by some people as like a money machine.
I think Veritable Vegetable or Communion, which Tribal Thumb renames Wellsprings Communion.
Which we got to talk about that.
Yeah, it's after.
Eerie.
Sorry.
I don't know. I know there's a lot of things named Wellsprings, but it's a little bit of a weird one. For me.
Yeah, I think the name, the reason they call it that, it comes from this Wilhelm Reich quote that is at the front of like every single Wilhelm Reich book. Like if you go to a used bookstore and find something by Wilhelm Reich, the first page is going to say, off the domes, I think it's love, work, and play are the well springs of life. They should also govern it. This is like his big statement, which is kind of a nice line, you know. And
love,
I think
work, and knowledge.
Oh, it's knowledge.
It's knowledge.
Excuse me.
According to brainyquote.com.
No, I think it is knowledge. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, whatever. So they take over Communion and call it Wellsprings Communion, and I think they are actually making quite a bit of money out of it. And the accusation runs that they're at Veritable Vegetable, they're like making off with a bunch of shit. They're kind of like shit's falling off the back of trucks and showing up at Wellsprings Communion where it's getting sold to hippies, and they're making money that way. And it's run as a collective where like the people who are working there aren't really making shit. And so supposedly a lot of this money is getting funneled back into the group and getting funneled back to Earl and Benny Sargis. So this is where you really start to see...
classic off-the-top situation.
Yeah. You really start to see this dimension of Tribal Thumb here where they're also kind of like a criminal enterprise.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know, you have this
Which was kind of clear with the bank robbing.
Yeah. But I mean, a lot of these like revolutionary groups in the 70s, they'll like rob a bank to fund their revolutionary activities, right? That's the...
Yeah, but like a lot of times those revolutionary activities were just buying guns to rob more banks.
Right, right.
There's actually a really funny Time magazine article that references Tribal Thumb in like 75 and kind of like backhandedly says they're chiefly interested in non-revolutionary crime.
Yeah. I mean, I think that is actually an pretty important distinction to be made.
Yeah,
because, you know, there is a very romantic sort of sheen to a lot of these 1970s guerrilla groups. One which I completely understand, but like at a certain point, if you're getting to this from a real political level, a lot of the activities that are engaged in by groups like Tribal Thumb are pretty much indistinguishable from what might have been called in an earlier time banditry, you know?
Yeah.
And like, or maybe like similar to like anarchist activities in France in the early 20th century. It becomes like the revolution is just robbing more banks. And like there's the concept of like the proletariat or anything this is absent from a lot of these things.
Right. And with Tribal Thumb specifically, like they really don't seem to be doing political work of any kind. They just seem to like
That's
they
what I
have
mean.
this commune up in Humboldt where supposedly they raise Arabian horses. And they just sort of like
Interesting.
fuck around there and shoot their guns and do their Reiki and Bliss or whatever. And then they have these claws in these like businesses, these kind of like co-op style businesses that they're like sucking money off the top of, but they're not like doing political stuff. They're not like
Yeah.
organizing
Yeah.
people towards any kind of like political goal.
I mean, it definitely sounds more like a gang than any kind of
Right.
political
Yeah,
It operates
yeah.
like that. If you read,
Yeah.
like in some of the literature that appears, there's insinuations that either Tribal Thumb members that go to prison or get recruited out of prisons, like identify as Tribal Thumb as a prison gang, or at least just say that they're a part of this crew, Tribal Thumb, and it gets misconstrued as being a prison gang, which may explain some of these rivalries that emerge in the People's Food System. And it's a little unclear, like, what the process of recruiting like. It is important to say, especially in regard to this Reiki and Bliss moment and the takeover of Wellsprings Communion, that like Tribal Thumb is very often referred to as like a composition of a group of men surrounded by their women. And like there are a lot of women
Very
involved in Tribal
revolutionary.
Thumb. Yeah.
Right.
There are very crude accounts that often describe these women as beautiful, non-armpit shaving, sexy-ass sisters. And there's references to Tribal Thumb homing
I gotta
a lot
have
of
that
hot,
I'm not gonna
hairy,
say it sounds something
revolutionary
like
pussy.
very subtle.
Excuse me, can you say that again?
Yeah, so a lot of people have, one
This is-
particular man, this comes from
yeah.
an autobiography of a guy who was Earl Satcher's cellmate. It's not clear where because we haven't actually been able to get a physical copy of the book yet, and we're just going from the previews that we can find. But he says he was recruited into Tribal Thumb for at least a brief period of time by all of the hot, hairy, revolutionary pussy that is available in the group.
It's interesting.
That's
that,
his language, not mine.
Yeah.
It's not yours. The hair seems to make an appearance in both of those.
It was
No,
a hairy
it's a
time.
It was a very hairy time.
Let's go shoot. Jeffrey Epstein. Let's go shoot. Jeffrey Epstein. Let's go shoot. Jeffrey Epstein. Let's go shoot. Jeffrey Epstein.